What if I told you that history's last great empire may have ended with a ghost? A boy who was crowned as ruler, paraded as the symbol of power, yet vanished so completely that some historians argue he might never have existed in the first place.
Here's the mystery I want you to wrestle with. Was this figure a real emperor, a flesh and blood child lost to the shadows of time? Or was he nothing more than a political invention, a convenient puppet created to make the empire's collapse look less humiliating? Think about it. An empire dies, and suddenly its final leader disappears, without a grave, without a legacy, without even a clear record of his fate. Does that sound like history or like fiction?
So I'll leave you with this challenge as we dive into the story. Who was he? Was he the last legitimate ruler of a dying world, or a phantom stitched into the chronicles to give closure to a fallen empire? Stick with me until the very end, because only then will I reveal his name and why he remains one of the most controversial figures history may or may not have ever known.
Picture this. An empire that once ruled the known world, now reduced to a corpse, dressed in ceremonial robes. By the late 5th century, the Western Roman Empire was no longer the titan of Julius Caesar or Augustus. It was a broken system, bled dry by corruption, invasion, and betrayal. Rome itself was not the center of power anymore. It was a relic, a museum of fading marble and half-empty streets. But here's where the story becomes almost theatrical. In the middle of this crumbling stage, the so-called Emperor of the West was not a warrior, not a statesman, not even a man. He was a boy, or at least that's what the records claim. And this is where the controversy begins. Some historians describe him as a helpless child, crowned simply to give the illusion that Rome still had an emperor. Others suggest he was no more than a puppet, controlled by barbarian generals who used his name to issue decrees. But then there's an even darker possibility. What if this child emperor never existed at all? Imagine the convenience of inventing a powerless boy to serve as the symbolic last ruler. No dangerous adult with claims to legitimacy, no rival to challenge the generals. Just a placeholder, a ghostly figurehead to mark the end of an empire. Does that sound paranoid? Maybe. Or maybe it's exactly how politics works when power is slipping through your fingers.
Let's talk evidence. Chroniclers from the time mention him, yes, but in the vaguest of terms. He's called the Boy, the Little Emperor, sometimes just a name in passing. There are no detailed descriptions of his personality, no accounts of speeches, no surviving portraits we can confirm as his. For a ruler who supposedly closed the curtain on one of history's greatest empires, that silence is deafening. Compare that to other child rulers. Tutankhamun in Egypt, Edward VI in England, both left trails of intrigue and reform. But here, nothing. Just a vanishing act. If he was real, he was the most invisible emperor Rome ever had. If he was fake, well, history just might be lying to us.
Think about how
unsettling that possibility is. We build our understanding of the past on documents, inscriptions, coins, chronicles. But what happens when those sources are manipulated, when names are inserted or erased for political convenience? The Western Roman Empire didn't collapse in one clean moment. It was a long, messy unraveling. And maybe those in power wanted to give it a neat ending. A boy emperor deposed by a barbarian general, Rome's symbolic flame extinguished. It's a story almost too perfect. So perfect, in fact, that some argue it can't be trusted. After all, who benefits from history telling us the empire ended at that exact moment?
This is where I leave you hanging. If the boy existed, then he was the last emperor of the West, discarded like a broken toy when he was no longer useful. If he didn't, then we've been repeating a lie for over 1,500 years. A lie written into every school book, every timeline, every lecture about the fall of Rome. Which one is it? Flesh and blood or carefully crafted illusion? The trail only grows colder from here, and yet the ghost of this emperor refuses to let go. And maybe that's the point. He's not just a historical figure. He's a question mark carved into the very end of Rome itself.
Let's strip away the glory and face an uncomfortable truth. If this boy really existed, he was never a ruler in any meaningful sense. He was a child tossed into the lion's den of collapsing Rome, a pawn wearing a crown too heavy for his head. Some accounts suggest he was no older than 12 when he was declared emperor, a mere ornament for the empire's final days. Now ask yourself, what kind of empire crowns a boy when the world is literally crumbling around it? The answer is simple and damning. Rome didn't crown a ruler. Rome crowned a distraction, a piece of theater meant to convince a weary population that the empire still had legitimacy. But here's the kicker. If that's true, then the boy was never meant to rule at all. He was meant to disappear.
And disappear he did. There are no speeches remembered, no decrees that carry his mark, no victories attached to his name. Compare him to other young rulers across history. Louis XIV, crowned at 5, remembered as the Sun King. Even Ivan the Terrible, starting as a boy, built his brutal legend. But this child, silence, emptiness. The chronicles don't even bother to describe his face. It's almost as if the empire itself wanted him erased, not celebrated. Some scholars argue that's precisely the point. A puppet installed by his father, a Roman officer desperate for scraps of authority. Others whisper an even darker idea, that the boy was nothing but ink on parchment, invented to give the empire's fall a neat, tidy ending.
Now imagine standing in Ravenna, the so-called capital of this dying empire. You see soldiers in foreign armor, Germanic mercenaries more loyal to their warlords than to Rome. You see senators clutching their togas like relics of a vanished age. And in the middle of the charade, a boy is placed on the throne. The question is, who was truly in power? The boy emperor? His father? Or the barbarian general who would soon become famous for dethroning him? Some historians suggest the emperor's name was little more than a placeholder, a signature to rubber-stamp decisions made by others. If that's true, then was he even an emperor at all? Or just a political mannequin dressed up for a final performance?
But here's where the controversy burns hottest. If this boy was so insignificant, why do we even remember him at all? Why does every school book, every documentary, every lecture about the fall of Rome insist on ending with his name? The answer might shock you, because history needs clean endings. We don't like messy, uncertain collapses. We like stories with a beginning and a definitive end. So, the empire's death was packaged neatly. Rome's last emperor deposed by barbarians. A story so cinematic it almost feels scripted. And maybe it was. But here's the question no one dares to ask. If it was scripted, who was holding the pen?
So let me leave you with this thought. Maybe the boy existed. Maybe he didn't. Flesh and blood, or ghost created to close the book on Rome. Either way, his silence speaks louder than words. No monuments, no speeches, no legacy, just a name, a shadow, a disappearing act. And yet, here we are 15 centuries later, still arguing about him. Doesn't that strike you as strange? Doesn't it feel like history itself is playing a trick on us? The so-called last emperor is either the most forgettable ruler who ever lived or the greatest historical fabrication of all time. Which side are you on?
Every empire dreams of going out with a bang. One last glorious battle. One heroic end echoing through centuries. But Rome? Rome ended with a whimper. No grand last war. No triumphant defense of the eternal city. Instead, the so-called last emperor was quietly deposed, packed away like an inconvenient relic. And then, nothing. Think about it. This was Rome, the empire of legions, Caesars, gladiators. And yet, its supposed final ruler was erased with barely a whisper. Doesn't that feel staged? Doesn't it feel deliberate? Here's what we're told. A barbarian warlord marches into Ravenna, strips the boy of his title, and then spares his life. No blood, no drama, no spectacle. The boy is said to have been sent away with a pension. Convenient, isn't it? Too convenient. When in history has a conqueror been so merciful, so polite, so generous to a dethroned emperor? It reeks of a narrative polished after the fact, a story to make Rome's end look civilized, not catastrophic. Some argue maybe there was no boy to depose, no pension to grant, no quiet retirement. Maybe the boy was a myth, a curtain call that never truly happened.
But let's suppose for a moment the boy was real. Then why does the historical record abandon him so quickly? Where did he go? Did he live out his days on a farm?
Or was he silenced, erased not just from the throne, but from existence itself? This is where the debate rages hottest. Some cling to the pension story, others whisper he was too dangerous to leave alive. Quietly killed, quietly erased. But here's the problem. No proof either way, just fragments, rumors, and silence. And silence in history is often louder than words.
Now ask yourself, why do we accept this silence? Why do we accept the neat little package that says, Rome ended, a boy was deposed, the story is over? Is it because the evidence is convincing, or because the story is convenient? History is often written not by the victors, but by the survivors, the ones who craft the narrative afterward. What if the last emperor was nothing more than a character, a figure created to give Rome a clean ending? Easier for textbooks, easier for school children, easier for us. And here, where the silence becomes deafening. No grave, no monument, no inscription, nothing. The boy vanishes into the void. Maybe he was never meant to be remembered. Maybe he was never meant to exist outside the story. So we're left with a choice. Except that Rome's last emperor was the most forgettable ruler in history, or confront the possibility that he was never real at all, a ghost invented for closure. Which version do you believe? And now, after all the whispers, the speculation, the silence, it's time to confront the name behind the shadow. The boy, the ghost emperor, the fragile figure who supposedly watched the last fragments of the Western Roman Empire slip away. His name was Romulus Augustulus. Yes, the so-called final emperor of Rome bore the same name as Rome's legendary founder and its greatest ruler. Coincidence? Or a deliberate fabrication? Think about it. The odds, inhale, are just too perfect. The controversy explodes here. Was Romulus Augustulus a real boy, plucked from obscurity, forced onto a throne? Or was he a political invention? Romulus, the founder. Romulus, the ender. Does that sound like fate? Or does it sound like propaganda? A story crafted to soothe the Roman psyche, to make collapse feel like destiny rather than humiliation. Tell me that doesn't sound like the kind of lie the powerful would sell us.
And yet, even if he was real, his life reads like an insult. Stripped of his crown at barely 12 years old, erased completely. No monuments, no tomb, no family, just silence. Is it even possible for the last emperor of Rome to leave behind so little? Or is the absence of evidence itself proof? Proof that he was never truly there. Here's where the debate rips history apart. If Romulus Augustulus was real, he was the weakest emperor in Rome's 1,000-year story.
But if he was a fabrication, then every textbook, every classroom, every timeline has been built on a lie. Which would you rather believe? That Rome ended with a whimper under a boy, or that historians have been feeding us a myth for centuries? And so, the ghost of Romulus Augustulus lingers. Was he flesh and blood, or just ink and parchment? His name feels too perfect, his disappearance too clean, his legacy too empty. The truth may never be known, but his shadow still haunts us. So I'll leave you with this. Do you believe in Romulus Augustulus, the forgotten boy emperor? Or Romulus Augustulus, the legend that never lived?
So here we are, staring at the ghost of an emperor who may or may not have existed. If Romulus Augustulus was real, Rome didn't end with fire and steel. It ended with a boy dismissed like an afterthought. But if he was invention, then history has been lying to us for 15 centuries. Or maybe both are true. A boy existed, but the emperor called Romulus Augustulus? That might be the fiction.
And this is where the story slips back into the shadows. Because the real question isn't just who Romulus Augustulus was, it's why we remember him at all. History loves clean endings. Maybe that's why his name is burned into every textbook. Not because of what he did, but because he made the story feel complete. But what if Rome never truly ended? What if it survived in the East, in the church, in the very laws we still live under? So I'll leave the ending to you. Was Romulus Augustulus real? Was he fake? Or is history itself the greatest conspiracy of all? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Was he flesh or fiction? Because sometimes the past doesn't give us answers. Sometimes it only gives us shadows.